you go into chapter 8 here, tells another story of the Rangers and the resurrection of the Army Rangers and the guerrilla raid that failed to forestall their second death. Just another one of these. You got a guy named John Hugh McGee. Mm-hmm. These characters, all of them, they're freaking epic. I mean, what this guy did is just incredible. His career, you look at these guys' career,
and I mean, at least in John McGee's case, I mean, he's a totally. He maybe has the worst World War II experience of anybody.
Yeah. Let me just jump into that real quick. A year later, McGee was at the epicenter of history, hopelessly commanding Moro troops in the Philippines against Japanese bombers in the snake-choked malarial hills around Del Monte Airfield at kilometer 117 of the Sayre Highway, becoming the only American of the 11 who fought there to survive the war. After 6 months of resistance, on May 10th, 1942, McGee swallowed his pride, obeyed his superior, and with a humiliating blindfolded salute, surrendered himself and his American and Filipino troops to imperious Japanese officer wearing a kimono. Many of the Filipinos were tied to stakes, shot, and buried in pits, the Japanese soldiers never bothering to confirm they were dead. At 33, McGee's dark brown hair had already faded into an iron gray. For the next 25 months, McGee survived beatings, trench foot, dysentery, malaria, mosquitoes, cages, and slavery. For nourishment, he and his fellow prisoners were fed a meager diet of rice and a few vegetables that occasionally included yams, dog meat, wafer-thin candy bars, and cigarettes, the last two purchased with a monthly allotment of 40 pesos that the Japanese could turn into a lever to pry prisoners' submission. So sensitive did the men become to their hunger that when fearful of transfer, they gorged themselves on every scrap they had hidden. One man even devouring a litter of puppies born the same day. Along with his Catholic faith to which he cleaved, McGee sustained his mind on a series of escape plans into the Philippine jungle, even making use of a urinary tract infection that kept him up at night to memorize the guideposts of the constellations. To each plan was attached an obvious corollary, obvious to him anyways. Once escaped, he would raise and lead an army of Filipino guerrillas against the Japanese. For 2 years, he plotted, mentally choosing men for work details, not for strength, but for their knowledge in gunnery and logistics, men around whom he could build the guerrilla army in his mind. On the night of June 12th, 2 years, 1 month, and 2 days after his capture, he finally got his chance. While anchored off the east coast of Zamboanga Peninsula on a prison transfer ship, McGee palmed off his rosary beads to a friend, dropped every stitch of his ragged clothing to the deck, then tiptoed over his sleeping comrades, placed a naked foot on top of the railing, and dove into the racing current. Through an initial volley of bullets and past two other prison ships, McGee drifted for miles until rescued by a native in an outrigger who paddled him to land, gave him a t-shirt which McGee turned into a loincloth. Ashore, two native boys eventually found, fed, and clothed him, tied undersized sneakers to the bottom of his feet like heelless slippers, then pushed and pulled his emaciated frame over jungle trails lit by nothing more than a torch as bright as a cigar tip. And you go on from there, but just you have to kind of realize what's happening with this guy and where this guy came from.
And what he wants.
Yeah.
He spends the entire war, essentially just neutralized.
Yeah. Well, so he's in prison camp for 2 years. When he finally escapes, he wants to go run a an army, a guerrilla army. Well, there's other people that have already been running a guerrilla army, and now they outrank him. They have the experience, and so he kind of gets sidelined the whole time. His
war is just a series of disappointments. Yeah. So he when he gets back home, he finally meets the daughter that his wife. He meets his daughter who he's never met before, and his reaction is immediately to volunteer for service back in the Pacific Theater. And the day he gets back, the day he takes command of his troops, they drop the bomb. And the entire time, that he's been, neutralized this entire time, facing these series of disbandments, his little brother has been one of Merrill's Marauders' most effective battalion commanders, which is a really frustrating thing for this poor guy.
Man,
So-
the psychology behind that.
Yeah, so when he finally gets to Korea, and he has this new opportunity to prove himself, all he wants to do is create the army that he had built in his mind, and he gets there, anyway, you have the.
He ends up putting together kind of a group, McGee's Rangers. Is that accurate statement?
I mean, he's the indispensable person when it comes to Army Special Operations in Korea. Everything sort of flows out of him. He has all of these ideas at the beginning of the war, and he puts them all in writing. And so everything from the Army Rangers are reconstituted based off of his recommendations. The partisan command is created based off of his recommendations, and he wants to sort of combine these units together. He's got this idea. It's sort of unformed. It's not exactly what it's not a mature idea. At the beginning of the war, it becomes you see when you look through the structure of the institution that he had sort of created, you see like a siege of Sodom.
Yeah, like
almost.
the components are
Yeah,
there.
like they're there. Like you can see, and every time that he constitutes this thing, the Navy is a critical part of his ideas. You can't do any of the types of things that he wants to do unless you have significant Navy support, Navy transports. Anyway, so the problem is, the Army has moved past all of his ideas. They entertain him. They entertain these ideas for a period, and as you see throughout his service, the Army plucks these things off the table one at a time, leaving him to go back to the States, not in disgrace, but not to fulfill the thing that he wants.
He